Thank you, everyone, for joining us for the third episode of Monster MASH Mondays. I am Dr. Naim Alkhouri, the Chief Medical Officer at Arizona Liver Health in Phoenix, Arizona, and I've been taking care of patients with fatty liver disease, or what we call now FAASLD and MASH, for the past 15 years. I am joined this evening by my dear friend, Tony Villiotti. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Tony Villiotti, and I'm a former liver patient, having received a liver transplant. And I am also the founder of NASH Knowledge, which is a nonprofit which has a mission of increasing awareness and providing education about fatty liver disease, no matter what name you call it.
Thank you, Tony, for joining us. You really have an incredible story, and I want to start from the beginning. When were you first aware that you have fatty liver disease, and how did your healthcare provider make the initial diagnosis?
Sure. Yeah. Just to set the stage, I was 59 years old. I was retired. I had type 2 diabetes, and I was obese. So I was seeing my doctor, my primary care physician, every 6 months because of my diabetes. And at one of the appointments, he had done a liver function panel and told me I had elevated liver enzymes, which meant I had a fatty liver. And it didn't make a big deal. It didn't seem to be that big of a problem. He said I should lose some weight, but I'd been told that at every doctor's appointment, so I didn't really set off any warning bells.
So you bring up a very important point that sometimes primary care physicians don't, tell patients about the potential for progression of fatty liver disease. They don't determine the severity of the disease when they make the diagnosis initially. So what were some of the recommendations that you received initially?
Initially it was just lose weight.
Yeah.
It wasn't until actually 9 years later, which is after 18 doctor's appointments, where he told me I had NASH and I probably had cirrhosis. And he discovered that he had asked me to do an ultrasound before one of my appointments. So at that point, he advised me I had NASH and probably cirrhosis, which I found very confusing. I didn't know what NASH was, and I never knew I was at risk for cirrhosis because I was a non-drinker. I was associated cirrhosis with drinking.
Yeah, I mean, another very important point. Unfortunately, we see this in our clinics often. I can tell you probably on a weekly basis, I see a case like yours, Tony. Someone was told they have fatty liver disease 10, 15 years ago. They're told to lose weight. They really tried, but, it's easier said than done. And then they show up to see us, and we do a FibroScan test, we do ultrasound, and then we find that they have cirrhosis. When I have to sit down with them and have this difficult conversation and tell them they have cirrhosis, as you said, they all look at me like, how did I develop cirrhosis? I don't drink alcohol. For most lay people, they think if you don't drink alcohol, you can never develop cirrhosis. And then we have to explain to them that having type 2 diabetes, being overweight, having dyslipidemia, metabolic syndrome, these are all risk factors for fatty liver disease that can progress over time to, as you said, NASH, or we call it now MASH, and cirrhosis of the liver. So when you told you have cirrhosis, what happened next? I mean, I know it's always disappointing to hear the word cirrhosis, but how did your disease progress?
Yeah, well, at that point, I was referred to a hepatologist, and I met with her. She confirmed the cirrhotic diagnosis, and again, suggested that I lose weight, and I began a regimen where every 3 or 6 months I would undergo an MRI. And I actually lost about 20% of my body weight, but it was too late. The disease had already progressed to the point where weight loss was not going to help me. So I just continued to see her, and ultimately within 2 years I developed liver cancer. And at that point, the story changed. Obviously, it became a very serious situation, and I met with her and an oncologist, and I was still concerned about my diabetes. I'd done a little research on transplants and had read that that after a transplant, your diabetes tends to get worse. So I relayed that to her, and she summed up my situation very perfectly in one sentence. She said, "We can treat diabetes. We can't treat you if you're dead." And so at that point, I got on a transplant list, and life progressed from there.
Okay, wow, my friend, you have a very powerful story. So you developed all the feared complications of fatty liver disease. Unfortunately, to develop cirrhosis, that's always not good news. But then to develop liver cancer, what we call hepatocellular carcinoma, that's even more troublesome. I always tell my patients with NASH cirrhosis that you are at risk every year, 1 to 2%, to develop hepatocellular carcinoma or primary liver cancer, which means if you have cirrhosis for 10 years, we're talking about 10 to 20% of patients developing liver cancer. And that's why it's very important, as you said, to receive imaging of the liver at least every 6 months, and that can be done with liver ultrasound, CAT scan, MRI, and then we also do a blood test called alpha-fetoprotein. And you are lucky that they discovered the cancer early enough that you're still a candidate for liver transplantation. But I want you to highlight for the audience that liver transplant is not a quick fix, and you still need lifelong anti-rejection medications. Do you want to tell them a little bit about your journey with liver transplant?
Sure. Yes. Yeah, I would be glad to. I guess the way I would sum it up is, a liver transplant is not the end of the story. You're just opening up a new chapter, and it does have an impact on you. First, it's very, very important that you don't revert to your past eating habits. In my case, we hear of way too many cases where someone has a transplant and ends up going through the whole thing over again because they redevelop NASH and even liver cancer. So in my situation, as I expected, my diabetes did get worse. I now take insulin shots, multiple insulin shots a day. Before this transplant, I never received an insulin shot. Also, my kidneys were perfectly normal until the transplant, and since then I've lost about 2/3 of my liver function. So there's no question that it's better. It's way better to receive the transplant than not, but it's not. Like as I said, it's not the end of the story. You need to be really diligent about your lifestyle, post transplant.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, the outcomes of liver transplant keep improving. I think the quality of life is much better after a liver transplant. And I want to highlight also to the audience that there's no expiration on a liver transplant. So you can live with it for decades. The liver should last you for the rest of your life. So, very good option in selected cases. But ideally, if you can avoid progression to cirrhosis and the need for transplant altogether, that would be the ideal outcome. So Tony, to avoid progression to cirrhosis, I think education is key early on. So where do you go to get more helpful information about fatty liver disease and MASH and cirrhosis for both patients and also healthcare providers?
Yeah, well, that's an area that was sorely lacking during my process, where I received very little education about the disease. Things kept happening to me that I didn't know I was at risk for, or didn't even know what they were. Hepatic encephalopathy being an example. Never heard of it till I had it. So it's really important to become an educated patient or provider as well. So I think there are a lot more resources that have become available since I went through this process. The American Liver Foundation certainly has good resources. The Global Liver Institute, the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease, and even like smaller organizations like my own, we have educational resources available.
Okay, can you tell us about the educational resources that you have at your organization and the website, if you can also point it to our audience?
Yes, certainly. The website is nash-now.org. That's nash-now.org. And based on my experience, I look back at what had just happened to me, and I what I thought about was what information would have been helpful to me when I was diagnosed. So we developed something called the Fatty Liver Roadmap. I always told people I wish on day one I'd been given a roadmap that would have told me where the disease could lead, not would lead, but could lead. So just so you know what may be ahead of you. So we have that. We also produced a documentary about my experience and experience of some others, about the disease. And we have a multitude of resources, but aimed at early education, for example, with children. We have children's coloring books, not talking about liver disease, but talking about the liver, why it's important, why it's important to keep it healthy and so forth. So we have, we probably have 18 or 20 education pieces available through our website, all of which are available at no charge.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for doing this through your organization. This is wonderful. You mentioned the complications of cirrhosis and you mentioned encephalopathy. Also, we've had patients develop what we call ascites, which is fluid accumulation in the abdomen. We have patients developed varices in the esophagus and stomach, and that can lead to bleeding, which can be life-threatening. In fact, we published a paper a decade ago when I was at the Cleveland Clinic, where we asked patients with cirrhosis from fatty liver disease coming to be evaluated for liver transplant, did you know that you had any liver disease prior to presenting with these scary complications like encephalopathy and ascites? And at the time, again, a decade ago, 68% had no idea they had any liver disease until they showed up with ascites or variceal bleeding or encephalopathy. And we need to change this. I think it's really not fair for our patients to go through life thinking they have a mild disease, fatty liver, it comes with weight gain, diabetes. They don't know about the consequences, the potential risk of progression to cirrhosis, and also the risk for liver cancer. And you're a living example of someone who developed all these complications. But I think your story has a happy ending, and it's so powerful to see you doing all these wonderful things to educate patients and make sure that they don't experience the same complications. So any last minute advice, anything else you would like to share with our patients living with MASH and fatty liver disease?
But last thing I would like to mention, and this may be more even for patients or people who aren't even patients yet, but how this disease will sneak up on you. I had absolutely no symptoms until I already had cirrhosis and even liver cancer. It was only the 6 months or so after my liver cancer diagnosis that I got serious symptoms. The back encephalopathy, ascites, which you had mentioned. So this thing just sneaks up on you, and that's why it's really important to be aware of and become educated about who's at risk for the disease, and and just learn more about it so you can have an educated discussion with your physician about it.
Yeah, I think this is a very important that the disease can sneak up on you. So one of the key messages we've been trying to drive is that anyone at risk to have MASLD, MASH, fatty liver should be actually screened, because you cannot rely on symptoms. So anyone with type 2 diabetes, they need to ask their healthcare provider, did you check on my liver? Did we check my liver enzymes? Did I have an ultrasound? Even better if they have access to technologies like FibroScan or MR elastography or other blood tests that can tell you the stage of damage and are you on your way way to have MASH and fibrosis and eventually cirrhosis. I think this will be a very important message for the audience to leave with. Well, we're at time, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me for this Monster MASH Monday, and thank you again for everything you're doing for this patient population. We really appreciate all these educational materials and all the events that you organize. And I hope to see you soon at one of the liver meetings. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And for the audience, if you want to engage in more MASH CME activities, please visit the medscape.org website. We have several new CME activities that are very engaging. Thank you so much for your attention.